Welcome, everyone, to Spirit Matters, your daily Bhakti Center podcast, where we speak on spiritual subject matters and learn how to bring them into our everyday lived realities. We look at spiritual truths and try to understand them practically. And specifically, we're starting off with the Bhagavad-Gita today. So lots to talk about there. But before we go there, I am joined by our wonderful co-host and tri-host, Achyuta Gopi and Dayal Guranga. How are you doing today, Achyuta?
I'm good. It's a new day, new week.
Love that. Yes.
It's a new day. It's a new dawn.
It's a new life.
You
New
glad?
life.
And I'm feeling.
And I'm
How are you
feeling.
today?
I'm doing good.
Great.
I used to just say I'm doing okay, and then someone messaged to me that every time I ask how you're doing, you're just saying you're doing okay, and I'm worried if you're actually doing okay. So I'm realizing I need to be a little bit more uh, colorful in the way I describe how I'm doing. So I'm thinking of new ways to describe how I'm doing other than just okay.
We have a very dear friend, the three of us, whose name is Jai Jagannath, and his answer to how are you doing, like about 90% of the time is I'm suffering. And he's quite honest. And he usually says that with a lot of laughter behind it, but I really find that quite refreshing.
You're so, oh my God, thank you. That's so refreshing. I'm so
I
glad
think
you're
it's
suffering.
refreshing. I think it's refreshing, to be honest. Um, on that note, I'm also doing okay. I'm not doing good particularly, but I'm doing okay. I'm here.
Although I think if we are suffering 90% of the time, okay, my brother used to ask me, he's like, "How are you today?" And I'm like, okay, I have a bit of a headache, whatever. And he's like, "Actually, you have a headache usually about like 4 out of 7 days of the week." That's true. He's like, "You should just say you're doing normally." I'm like, you know what? You're right. So if we're suffering 90% of the time, at what point do we say, either I change it or this is my normal state?
Or this is my normal state.
Yeah.
I'm in my normal
I've
state.
significantly lowered my standards in terms of what is a good life, and therefore I'm doing pretty great.
Exactly.
Jai.
Welcome, everybody. Good morning. Happy Monday, and so glad that you're getting your daily dose of spiritual check-in and upliftment. Read the Bhagavad Gita, and you will learn to lower your standards of happiness.
Ribo.
Uh, this is my first episode. Somebody told me that this would help me. I feel worse.
Okay. Welcome to our live studio audience, by the way. Martha is here. Rasika Gopi is here with Jiva. Lane and Kimberly, Leileshwari all the way in Brazil. Dana, Pasha, Kristen in the Philippines. Sydney, Rachna, Irenka, Vidya, and Lexi. We got a full house today. So today we are starting off reading our Bhagavad Gita as it is by Srila Prabhupada, purports by Srila Prabhupada. If you don't have a book and you want to read along with us, Doyal in the chat put a link for Vedabase, or you can just do a Google search, Vedabase, and you can find the Bhagavad Gita there. And we thought we would start with the introduction and just read a little bit of the introduction. And there's so much there just in the first paragraph. So we thought we would read there and then open it up to conversation. Does that sound good?
Sounds
That's
good.
what I'm. That's the plans. What we're ready for.
Okay.
Um,
I think Doyle, take it away.
I'm taking it away, guys.
Take it away.
The bug. I mean, the introduction of the Bhagavad Gita. You know, this is not a translation of anything. This is just Srila Prabhupada's, this particular commentator's words and his sort of almost kind of prepping us, putting us in the mindset of how to approach this book. And that itself is a big part of spiritual life that, you know, and we'll learn this so much throughout the Gita, that it's not so much about what we do. Spiritual life is not a sequence of actions, but it's a consciousness that that we bring to actions, and it's also there are certain actions that put us in a particular mindset. You know, there are so the activities that we do in spiritual life are meant to mold our minds and our hearts in a particular way, in a particular direction. I heard this really. It was just it was just yesterday actually. I read this definition. There's this word in Sanskrit. It's called tapa, which is a translation of the word austerity, or it literally means heat, and it's translation of this word austerity. And Srila Prabhupada in the commentaries, is from Srimad Bhagavatam, he gave this really, really interesting definition of tapa or austerity that I kind of held on to and I repeated to myself a number of times. He was quoting some other place and he said, Tapa is explained as follows: complete control of the mind and senses and their complete concentration on one kind of activity is called tapa. Complete control of the mind and senses and their complete concentration on one kind of activity. And so I was thinking one time, I think Rana Swami was asked, like, if you were to define bhakti in one word, and one word given was absorption. And it's how to choose where I absorb my mind. And so, before we read, before we do meditation, before we, whatever we may engage in, it's almost kind of like, can I take a minute to make sure my mind is in the right place and I'm approaching this in the right place, that I can actually receive what's being given to me? It's kind of like tilling the soil a little bit, in order for the seed of knowledge to kind of go into the heart. And so Srila Prabhupada is going to kind of um, give us a little bit of a context about how the Gita itself is such a widely read and translated book, and yet it's so easy to miss the meaning. It's so easy to get the wrong idea depending upon on where we're coming from. And so he I thought maybe we can begin with this first paragraph. Um, the first few paragraphs are him just kind of offering some prayers and some invocations and some meditations before beginning this journey. And then he mentions this paragraph down. He says, Bhagavad Gita is also known as Gita-upanishad. It is the essence of Vedic knowledge and one of the most important Upanishads in Vedic literature. Of course, there are many commentaries in English on the Bhagavad Gita, and one may question the necessity for another one. So Prabhupada's admitting that there's so many commentaries on Gita. Why should I write another one? What makes, why is there a need? This is in the 1960s. He's writing this. This present edition can be explained in the following way. Recently, an American lady asked me to recommend an English translation of Bhagavad Gita. Of course, in America, there are so many editions of Bhagavad Gita available in English. But as far as I have seen, not only in America, but also in India, none of them can be strictly said to be authoritative, because in almost every one of them, the commentator has expressed his own opinions without touching the spirit of Bhagavad Gita. The spirit of Bhagavad Gita is mentioned in Bhagavad Gita itself. It is just like this. If we want to take a particular medicine, then we have to follow the directions written on the label. We cannot take the medicine according to our own whim or the direction of a friend. I'll just read one more sentence and then we can pause. It must be taken according to the directions on the label or the directions given by a physician. Similarly, Bhagavad Gita should be taken or accepted as it is directed by the speaker himself. The speaker of Bhagavad Gita is Sri Krishna. So this idea, and I'll just elaborate a little bit more, and then I want to hear from you guys. To really get the most out of reading Bhagavad Gita, and this will come up more in Prabhupada's teachings and throughout the Gita. There really is this we're challenged to almost to put ourselves in an open mindset of being willing to put our own conceptions and ego identities aside in order to be transformed. And there's a sense of it. the idea of accepting authority is something very almost it gives this kind of cringy reactionary feeling for the most part. But Prabhupada's mentioning very early on that if you really want to get the most out of anything, especially this book, then there's a need of actually submitting yourself to um, accepting things that you may not know. There are things I don't know, and I'm willing to like not project my own understanding of on things or reality, and I'm willing to open myself up to new ideas. And so that's just kind of like the introductory part of the Gita that I'm reading as Prabhupada starts to prep us in this introduction.
I had a conversation with a friend once, and they were they were saying pretty much, they're like, what's so great about Prabhupada and Prabhupada's Gita? They're like, I've read, so many Gitas, and this Gita and that Gita. It's not about the words or even the commentator or the commentary. It's like the meaning that you get from it. And my question was, what the heck does that even mean? Like, honestly, I was like, what? I was like, that sounds like a load of garbage. When you go to school, you're not reading every physics book, nor do you go to school questioning the teacher. Like, who gives you the right to know so much about physics? I could go to that physics teacher or a different physics teacher or a different physics teacher. And I'm like, but you're not doing that. Why? Oh, well, I want to learn physics. I want to pass the class. And I'm like, yeah. And so my end moral was, drinking from too many wells just gives somebody dysentery. Like, you might think, oh, but I plucked it from here, and I plucked this from here, and I plucked this from here, and I got this from here, and I got this from here. But until you take the time to actually dive deeply into something, everything is all, it's so surface and superficial that I'm like, well, what meaning are you able to get from just superficial tasting and sampling of everything? You don't get the real juice from what someone is even trying to say. It's like just listening to your intros every day, Doyle, and never diving into what you think or diving deeper into the episode or whatever. Just listening to the initial, like, our initial banter and joking at the beginning, and then you think you know everything about us, this podcast, and what we're all trying to accomplish. It's like, unless you actually do the work of showing up, it's like any relationship.
Hmm.
And Srila Prabhupada has worked hard to create a relationship with Bhagavad-Gita, even through the things that sound harsh, or the things that you feel like, even moreover, the things that we don't know, the things that we hear that we don't like, the things that challenge us to think about our true identity. What do we do when we encounter that? Are we in a relationship as long as everything is superficial and nice, and then you find that one thing that challenges you and you're like, I'm off to find another relationship? It's never going to work. It's the same way with our spirituality. We should take these relationships a little seriously.
Hmm. I appreciate the idea of what I'm hearing and what I'm hearing you share, and also what Prabhupada is encouraging us is that don't run away once something gets a little hard. And I think a lot of times, in spiritual life, we think that everything is just supposed to feel good all the time. Every teaching is just supposed to fill our heart with butterflies and make me feel like um, and not everything's meant to necessarily align with my ego or align with what I want or think I want or need with my life. And sometimes we're going to be challenged actually. Sometimes something's going to feel a little uncomfortable. Sometimes things are going to um, um, cause me to reassess my direction or my activities or my choices. And for us to know that's what we're signing up for, that's why we're here. I'm not just here to hear the things that I like to hear. I'm not just here to be reaffirmed of all the things I think I already know. I'm here to challenge my worldview, and I'm taking the reason and I'm here reading this book because there's some level of faith or trust either in whoever gave it to me or where it's coming from, etc. And Prabhupada is just encouraging us, you've come this far, trust the process enough to, and he'll say this later on in the introduction, to at least theoretically accept that what you're reading is true. And if there's something that challenges you, rather than running away, just admit, I don't understand. I want to understand more. Just like you mentioned in a relationship, it's really, really beautiful. And Prabhupada has deepened his relationship with Bhagavad-Gita on a very, very, very deep level. But, imagine if, we think about, rather than committing ourselves to a person in relationship, we find ourselves just kind of taking a bit and piece from here and there. And as soon as something gets distasteful, I just go to somewhere else to fill my need. And so I'm appreciating that thought, and love to hear what you have to say, Kishore.
Yeah, I really like Srila Prabhupada's forwardness. It's one of my favorite qualities of him. And I like when he says that almost every one of the commentators has expressed his own opinions without touching the spirit of the Bhagavad-Gita. And I really love that, because to what both of you are saying in regards to, like, yeah, if you're reading something on the surface, if you're expected to just fit your worldview, if you expect it to just make you feel good all the time, then you're missing the point. And a lot of New Age spirituality is like that, right? It's like my rules, my opinions, how I want to feel. If it doesn't make me feel good, then I'm gonna pick something else from another, branch of spirituality that's gonna make me feel good. And I was thinking of a crude example, but not really. We were just talking about this at the beginning of the show. It's like, oh, how are you? I'm good. I'm great. Blah, 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 whatever. And I was just thinking that, like, New Yorkers get a bad rap for being mean. And we're not mean. New Yorkers just tell it as it is, like there's this like almost brusque honesty of just like, it is what it is, this is how it is. And I find that really refreshing. Like, as a New Yorker, I remember I was born and raised in New York. So I remember when as a teenager, it's very different. You want to get out of the city. Everyone's trying to come to the city. But I remember when I left the city and I was like in other places, I was like, something is strange and I can't put my finger on it. Like, I don't understand what is happening. And I realized that everything was just very on the surface. It was very pretty. Everything was very nice, but it was missing that kind of in your face, just like, this is it, And now when I'm walking around in New York, I find that appreciation, because I find myself wanting to complain of just like, oh my God, the garbage and the rats and the, and the whatever, and it's just too much. And then I'm just like, wait a minute, no, like, this is what it is, like, the world is like this, like, it is filled with garbage and it is going through a crisis, and it is what it is. And I really appreciate that, because what Srila Prabhupada is really telling us here is that, like, hey, you can't have your cake and eat it too. That's basically what he's telling us. You can't have a medicine, know that it's good for you, but just be whimsical and do what you want and expect to get a result out of it. And I find that really refreshing, because I think nowadays it's like, well, I'm going to take a little bit of this medicine, I'm going to take a little bit of that medicine, and I'm going to do a little bit of this, I'm going to do a little bit of that. And it's more of like wanting the things, whatever the things might be, let's say medicine, wanting the medicine to shape around me and my opinions, as opposed to me approaching the medicine and, listening to its instructions. And I really appreciate you, Doyal, mentioning about our relationship with authority, because it's such an interesting thing. So many people nowadays have such a hard time accepting authority, but Srila Prabhupada boils it down to such an easy thing. It's like, yeah, you have a medicine, it has directions. If you don't follow it, it's not going to work. And it's like, it's kind of that simple, So it's like, when it comes to spiritual life, I'm wondering, as to why there is that propensity to be like, well, I'm just going to bend these directions to fit how I want them to be for myself. And I'm just speaking from personal experience, that it doesn't work. If I want to take from here and take from here and take from there and kind of have my own agenda, my own agenda can get me into trouble. Mind can get you into trouble. I think the scariest place to be in the mind is where you're so convinced that what you're thinking is absolutely correct that you're not open to, like what you're saying later, Srila Prabhupada mentions, like theoretically, let's just accept that this is true for now. Like you're so convinced that like, no, this is the way that it is, that you're not open to seeing other things, and that's scary.
Yeah. And I think, as you mentioned, like it's an interesting question about why does, when we come to spirituality, we sort of feel like we can kind of make the rules up as we go. In any other science or area of thought, there's like this sense of like, oh, if I want to progress in this path, I need to find people who have progressed upon it and find teachers and guides, etc. And follow. There's a process. And so, like when we started this podcast, it was like, who are people that know how to run a podcast? How do I start a podcast? I need a Libsyn account, and how many times a day should we do it? Should we do it, et cetera? It's like you realize you got to find a process of people who know what they're doing, and you figure it out as you go. But when it comes to spiritual life, I think one of the big things is that we don't have an agreed definition of terms. Like we don't always understand what is spiritual, if I go to a concert and they're singing my favorite song and everyone's shouting the lyrics out, like that's a spiritual experience, or if I'm it just we have this sense of what's the difference between a genuine experience, spiritual experience, what's just raw emotion, what is a mental concoction or a mental state of being. And we kind of think that anything that's not like grossly physical is spiritual. But in Vedic psychology and in the science of the Gita, we learn there are different levels of consciousness and being. There's the gross physical body, but then there's also the subtle body, which consists of the mind, the intelligence, and the false ego. And things that take place on that level are also material, but we don't have, like, when I was studying psychology in college, my first year of college long ago, they have this thing called the mind-body problem, which is in science is like the connection between the mind and the body, and it's like this big, like, whoa, like the difference between the mind and the body. But it doesn't go beyond that. And for us, it's like the mind-body-spirit problem, taking it a step further, because the mind and the body are both matter. And so I think that because we lack to really understand what is spirituality, and it kind of just becomes this like, any feeling I have about something is spiritual, then it's really hard to kind of put our thumb on it and define it, which is why we'll find it like in the very first instruction that Krishna gives to Arjuna in the Gita in the beginning of the second chapter is defining the difference between spirit and matter, that which is eternal and that which is temporary. Those who are seers of the truth, who actually know, have distinguished this. And so I think a big part of the first sort of cracking of our understanding of things that we'll find in the Gita is what is spiritual and what isn't. Next episode, are crystals spiritual? Are dream catchers spiritual?
Yes to both.
Yes to both. Let's see. Do you have a verse in Bhagavad Gita that backs up your claims?
Yes. At least for crystals, I do. Yeah.
There's another. I want to hear from you, Chuta. Also, I mean, we're almost out of time, but also, there's I skipped down a lot from where we were into a later section in the introduction that I wanted to read and look at. That takes up this mood. Prabhupada mentions that the Bhagavad Gita should take up in a spirit of devotion. This idea of how to approach spiritual texts and spiritual reading in the Bhagavad Gita and how to approach spiritual life in general. But I don't think we have time to read more. And so Kishore, you take it away from here.
So we are running fresh out of time. So we will hand it over to Kimberly for some takeaways, and then we're going to go to Achyuta for an extended takeaway. I'll hear from Achyuta.
So today we're walking away that there are a lot of things we don't know. So we can challenge ourselves and be more willing to open ourselves up to new ideas that may not always align with our egos. And then rather than drinking from too many wells and getting superficial tastes, we can dive deeper into one and follow this prescription to build a more serious relationship.
Beautiful. I love that. Thank you so much, Kimberly. Achyuta, what's your extended takeaway?
Yeah, I think mine is focusing on those spiritual relationships. How am I deepening my spiritual relationship to the commentator, to the text, to Krishna, all of the above? Just examining.
I love that. Thank you so much. How about you, Daya?
Takeaway is I don't have to have it all figured out, and to think that I do have it all figured out is a very dangerous place to be. And so I'm just sort of like gonna rest in that a little bit.
Beautiful. My takeaway is that Bhagavad-Gita and Krishna and Srila Prabhupada are just so expert at keeping it real. And I love that. I love that. So we will continue tomorrow speaking more about the introduction and this later section that Doyal brought up about devotion specifically. And we'll start to talk about that tomorrow at 9 a.m. We'll be here. Thank you all so much. Just one message for all of you. In end of September, Doyal, Achyuta, and I are going to India. We actually only have like 10 spots left for India. So if you are wanting to come to India with us, Pasha's going to be there, Lane's going to be there, 3 of us are going to be there. We're going to go to different cities in Rajasthan. We're going to go to the Himalayas in Rishikesh, and we're going to go to Vrindavan, Krishna's birthplace. And so it will be a trip to remember. If you have any questions about that, it's 2 weeks, September 25th to October 8th. You can reach out to me or Doyal or check the website. Yes, Pasha's saying, please come to India. Thank you all so much. And we're so grateful for all of you listening out there and for our live studio audience. We will see you tomorrow at 9 a.m. Bye-bye.